Hello YouTubers, today we're going to talk about connectors, and I'm going to cover the most common connectors you might see in the ham radio world. Now the first one is right here in front of you. Now mind you, these are just the connectors. Normally there would be cable on it, or there would be the chassis of a radio. In this case, this guy right here would go on the back of a radio, and this would be the one on the cable. This is referred to as a PL259, and this is an SO239. They go together and they thread, screw together like so. There it is, PL259 on it. Amphenol, which by the way is a very reputable brand. If you're going to buy connectors, get your connectors from known good brands. So this type of connector is intended to be used with thick cable like RG213, RG8. I guess you could put it on LMR 400. But you could also use it on thinner cable. And the way this thing comes apart, you do what I'm doing right here to unscrew it. And that takes it apart. And there's a piece right here called a reducer. So if you're using thin cable, you would feed it through the reducer. If you're using thicker cable, you feed it through there, and your center conductor goes on that pin and is soldered in. This type of connector is kind of a pain in the butt to use. It is a very old connector, but it is still commonly found on a lot of radio equipment. And putting it together is kind of annoying. Now they do have crimp style versions of this to make life a little bit easier. This part right here is commonly found on the back of HF radios. It's on the back of CB radios. It's on the back of a lot of marine radios. This type of connector has been in use for a very long time. And that is the SO239. That's a PL259. This right here has been used by some hams to make a quick and dirty quarter wave. Use it like this, and you put 4 ground radials out of like bent coat hanger material, wire coat hanger, and either screw them in or solder them in, and then on the top right here you put a radiating element, make your own quarter wave antenna out of it. So SO239, PL259. Let's go ahead and set that aside. And here's some more versions, but this is when you need to connect. You have 2 pieces of coax you need to put together. You can get one of these double female, or you can get a double male. They make adapters for anything and everything you could think of. So let's get away from those for right now. Next one up that's very common. This guy right here. Just this end, not the other end. This is an adapter, so just this end, which looks like that end, which looks like that one on that antenna, which looks like that one, which is the same thing, just a different color. That is called a BNC. Now there's a bit of back and forth as to what exactly BNC stands for. Some people think it stands for British Nut Connector. There's a couple of other explanations out there, but either way, BNC connectors are very common on older handheld radios. And the way this connector works, let me move these aside a second, is I'm going to go ahead and use this adapter right here. So take the antenna, and notice it has a way that it lines up. Push in, turn, and you'll feel it click. And then it's on there, but the problem is this can still wiggle. So to take it off, you push in a little bit, turn, and when the pin lines up, then you can take it off. You'll see what's inside. Now from the wiggling, that little centerpiece right there will spread apart and you'll have a bad contact. And you can kind of pinch that shut with some pliers if you got needle nose pliers that fit in there, or with a jeweler's screwdriver you can kind of bend it over a little bit so it makes better contact. But it's an end result of this movement that happens when people put the radio in their back pocket and then they sit on it. Having a handheld radio in your back pocket while you're sitting is a stupid move. It breaks the antenna connector. Don't do it. Anyways, this is the BNC connector. Super common. There are two styles. There's a 50 ohm and a 75 ohm. They are slightly different. But what you'll see used on amateur radio equipment, CB handhelds, old Marine VHF handhelds, so forth. Pretty much all older handheld radios. For ham radio use, for CB use, some business band, not many, a lot of Marine band radios would use this type of connector. And there you have an antenna with that kind of connector. And this is the same thing. It's black, so it matches the radio. Color doesn't matter. Same style connector. That is the BNC connector. Moving on. Another one that is extremely common, SMA. And there you have SMA connectors. Notice there's a little void in the center. It's a female. This is a female type connector. And here's a Baofeng, which most of us have seen or own. And there you see the other side of it. This is called an SMA connector. Here's a coax with an SMA on it. So this would be an SMA female. Now keep in mind, this type of connector is used a lot with Wi-Fi stuff, Chinese Wi-Fi stuff. And since they use it on all the Wi-Fi stuff, which they sell gazillions of, sometimes you'll find the Wi-Fi ones on radio equipment, which is referred to as reverse polarity, because you'll have a threaded outer portion, but in the center you'll have a pin, like what you have in that connector inside the radio. Right in there is a little pin. There is a reverse polarity style of this, and for a while there was even some that had reverse thread, which was kind of annoying. But the connector itself is called an SMA, and this just screws in, and all you do is thread it and screw it in until it's snug, and you're good to go. The benefit of the SMA connector is that since the antenna will actually seal up against the case of the radio, it can be weatherproof. The Baofeng is not, but the antenna connector will be. The BNC just can't do that. BNC connectors, just by the nature of that it has that slot and there's serrations on that center area, this is not and will never be weatherproof. But SMA connectors can be. Now, a little hint on a lot of these Chinese antennas, by the way, if you've never noticed, if you look inside the bottom, it'll tell you what the frequency range of the antenna is. Let's see if I can get my camera to focus. UHF 400 to 470. A lot of the Chinese antennas will give you the frequency range on the bottom of the connector. On some of the commercial stuff, they'll color code it. Different colors designate different bands. This connector is used now on most handheld radios. Very, very convenient for handheld radios. So this is the next most popular one. Now, what happened here? Manufacturing defect? No, Motorola being special. Motorola is great at being special. If you're new to Radioland, you'll quickly realize the frustration of everything that is Motorola. Motorola always wants to be special with everything. And the beauty of standards is there's so many to choose from. So, look at that. And it will actually, in some cases, will it work on this one? Nah, it won't go because of the pin. Sometimes that pin is in a little bit and it's just enough to screw this in, and then you smash the pin down on an SMA connector. So be very careful. This is called a stud mount. It is nothing more than a bolt used on older Motorola stuff, used on older commercial radios. It will thread where the SMA connector will, but it'll crush the center pin. Notice the SMA connector is designed for a center pin. Anytime you have a connector that has a center pin and an outer threaded portion, or the part of the connector on the outside is metal and you have a center pin, it's a coaxial connector. The Motorola one is not. It's just, think of it like a bolt that has an antenna on the end of it. So be careful with the stud mount. Don't confuse it with an SMA. If anything, look at your radio. If your radio has a center pin, that's an SMA connector right there. All right, next one up. And this one is if you're running a little bit more power. So I have an adapter here, but it shows you both ends. Well, this is an adapter, it's actually an attenuator, but this is called an end connector. Now, the end connector shares a lot in common with the BNC. All right. It shares a lot in common with the BNC. However, thing about the end connectors, notice that red washer in there. When you tighten down an end connector, it becomes weatherproof, which the PL259 is not. The PL259 is not weatherproof. You can wrap it with a special rubber tape and seal it, but then when you need to undo things, you have to take it all off. The end connector is weatherproof. This is the female side, and you see how it has this polished flat area where this red washer right here will seal. And that's what makes it weatherproof. So there you have end male and female. Moving on. Another one that's pretty common, more so in the auto radio world, but you'll see it in scanners. This guy right here, this is called a Motorola connector. And they invented it. Motorola originally started out as a company that made car radios. Motor for motor car, and the Rolla from the whole Victrola thing back in the day. So they invented this connector for car radios. So this is the male, and then you'll have something like this in the back of the car radio. And it's just push it in. That's all you do. So this type of connector is not really meant for transmitting through, but you will see it on some older scanners. You'll see a hole like this on the back of the scanner. And you could always shove a wire in there and it'll work, because the scanner doesn't transmit, it just receives. You're not going to hurt anything. But this is what the proper connector for it looks like right here. You set that aside. Going on to another goofy RF type connector. So once again, these are adapters. I'm just using the part that we need for this demonstration. This might look familiar to those of you in the audio world. It's an RCA connector. This is the RCA male. That's the RCA female. You've probably seen this on old stereo equipment, on car audio amps, so forth. That's all there is to it. RCA connectors. Now, why am I showing you audio connectors? Well, if you get into vintage radio, Collins, of all people, uses this on their radio equipment, both aviation equipment, and they use it a lot on their HF stuff. So yes, Collins would run 100 watts of HF through the lowly RCA type connector like you would use for your home stereo. Now the cable itself that they use is 50 ohm cable. It's not audio cable. So if you have a Collins radio, particularly the old S-line stuff, on the back of it, you're not going to see one of these unless somebody modified it. You're going to see one of these sticking out the back. So you have to get an antenna cable with an RCA, or get an adapter, which is precisely what this here is for. So you can hook up an antenna cable that uses a 259, screw it on there, and now you could plug into your old Collins radio, and you're done. Let's go on to our next bit of I Want to Be Special. This guy right here. This connector can be found on a lot of commercial stuff. Especially Motorola love to use this. This is a mini UHF. This is the female, and that's the male. It is essentially a miniaturized version of that guy. That's what they did. That's what the... So we're talking only about these ends right here. We're not talking about the rest of this connector. These two ends are just a miniature version of these two. The reason it's got these serrations on it, by the way, is so once you screw it down, there's some teeth. You can see it right there. There's some teeth that lock in, and when you tighten it up, once it's tight, it keeps it from unscrewing itself from wiggling around. That's why it's got those teeth on there. And they did the same thing with the mini UHF. You could actually see inside where there's the teeth that go on it. So when you're screwing these together, you might have to do a little wiggling to get parts to line up before it'll screw down tight. So that's the mini UHF. You'll find this on the back of a lot of Motorola radios, and some other brands of commercial radios will use this. Finally, an oddball. But if you get into any high power stuff, or you get your hands on some commercial stuff you're repurposing, you might run into this thing. It's called a C connector. It's like a giant one of those. It's like a giant end connector, rated for higher power. This is bigger and more robust. But C connector, N connector. And you can see in the center portion the difference. This here is insulated with Teflon. You have a much bigger center area than on the N connector. Will they fit? No, they won't fit. Will they fit that way? No, they won't fit. So it is designed to keep you from screwing things up. So I hope this has helped shed some light on the mystery of all of this stuff, because this gets annoying. And don't you worry, if you're in this hobby, pretty soon you will end up with a pile of random connectors in a drawer somewhere, because you bought one to do something and somebody gave you something else and you just kept getting more and more of them. It'll just keep happening. Until next time, this has been the Geek Pod.